Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to be making Swedish meatballs with gravy, mashed potatoes, and caramelized carrots and onions for dinner tonight. So we are going to start out to make the base of our Swedish meatballs. So we're going to peel one potato, chop it up, and we're going to boil it real quick to get nice and tender because we use potatoes as part of our binding agent in our Swedish meatballs. And then we're gonna saute up some minced onions until they're nice and golden brown, because those will also be going in our meatballs. And the thing about Swedish meatballs that make them so good is you use pork with them. A lot of places do beef, but you gotta use ground pork. It just makes a better meatball and has a nicer flavor profile. And you use a lot of caramelized onions. It just adds a delicious flavor. So I'm just gonna kind of chop up these potatoes really small because I want them to boil up fast and get tender quickly so that we can use them in our recipe. If you have leftover mashed potatoes, that's also like a great option to use, but boiling up one isn't too bad either. Okay, got my water on high, and I'm doing it in a teeny tiny pot here because it will cook faster than if I did it in a bigger pot. Okay, now we need to get our onions minced up and ready to caramelize. So I'm gonna put about 1.5 tablespoons of oil in my pan, and I'm gonna start warming it up, and then we're gonna just start chopping up 2 onions. I'm using 2 pounds of meat, so I'm going to be using 2 onions for it. Let's clear this out of the way. So I'm going to chop off my sides, and then I'm going to do a nice slit down the middle and get this outer skin off because it'll be chewy and it won't work well on minced for our minced onions. And let's prep this other guy. Slit through and remove this kind of first thick outer layer. And now we're gonna mince these up. So I'm just gonna cut them in half first, and then I'm gonna do really thin slices down. The thinner the better, because you do want a nice mince on these. And then little itty bitty slices. And I'm kind of just pinching my onions together until we get to the very end. And you want them to mince them up as small as you can get. I know some people who put them in a food processor and do that. You can do that as well if you want to. Sometimes that might give you more of an onion paste. So I always like to mince them. But if you're short on time, you can do that in a pinch. There we go. So I've got my first onion minced up pretty fine. And I'm just gonna go over it a couple more times because again, the smaller, the better. And I'm gonna put these in our oil that's warming up while I mince up our next one. And you can see my water over here with my little potato is already boiling quickly because it doesn't take long for a little pot to heat up. We're gonna do the same thing with this onion, some really thin slices across, and then we'll flip it and do the exact same going the opposite direction to get our small mince on it. There we go. We'll chop these through. And these are just gonna give such a wonderful flavor to the meatballs. So, but you have to saute them until they're nice and caramelized. Otherwise, the onion flavor can be a bit strong for our Swedish meatballs. That's what we're gonna be having tonight. We'll have our Swedish meatballs with mashed potatoes. We'll make a lovely brown gravy for the meatballs, and we'll also make some caramelized onions and carrots for dinner tonight. I was in Memphis this past weekend for a soccer tournament, and we always had to stop at IKEA, or as everyone here in America calls it, IKEA. the Swedish pronunciation is IKEA. I always normally get my meatballs there. I get a bag or two there. They're not as good as my mom's recipe, which we're making today. And I opted not to get them because we went on a Saturday and we weren't leaving until Sunday. But I've been craving them since, so we had to buy all the ingredients to make them. Very nice. And our the difference is like IKEA meatballs are made with beef. And my mom's recipe always uses pork because traditionally it was made with veal, which is not easy to come by. And so over time, the veal has been substituted for ground pork. And it just makes a big difference in the flavor and the texture of the meatball. I find pork is a bit more tender and has just a lovely flavor for these type of meatballs. These meatballs are very different from like your traditional like Italian meatball. Has a completely different flavor profile. And in Sweden, they typically serve these with lingonberries, and then you have your potatoes, and then a lot of times you'll have them with Swedish pancakes, which are kind of like crepes, and split pea soup. Okay, we have all of our onions in here, minced up nice, and now we're gonna saute them until they're nice and brown. So we're gonna get that caramelization out of them. Ooh, my eyes are starting to water from the onions. And I do have my oven preheated to 375 because once we roll them out, we'll pop them in the oven while we work on all of our other stuff. Okay, while we are waiting for our onions to start caramelizing, I'm gonna turn my water on over here for our potatoes, and we're gonna start peeling our potatoes for our mashed potatoes. So today we're using yellow potatoes or gold potatoes. I'm switching it up. Normally I use a good russet potato for my mashed potatoes, but we had these and they'll work well with the Swedish meatballs because they typically have more of gold potatoes or baby Dutch potatoes in Sweden.
Oh, you have a question. What are those onions being prepped for?
They are going to go in our Swedish meatballs. So we're going to caramelize them, and then we'll mix them with our ground pork and some other seasonings to make our Swedish meatballs. And then we'll make a gravy as well for them. So I've got my potatoes. I'm going to peel them up. Now these are like a yellow or gold potato, which technically means you don't have to peel them for mashed potatoes. They have a tender skin, but my family does not like skins in their mashed potatoes, so I always peel them for them. If it was my preference, you could just eat them just fine. But you gotta please the crowd. And with, I will say, 6 other dissenting opinions in our household, we peel the potatoes. Okay, we've got 3 more, and then we're going to chop these up and we'll toss them there. I do have one of the potatoes already boiling. That's going to be used in our, to make our Swedish meatballs. That's kind of also, you use one, boiled mashed potato in our meatballs, as well as the caramelized onions and some bread, egg, salt, and pepper. And get a quick peel on these. I find when you're making mashed potatoes, the bigger potato you can find, the easier it is to peel it. Little potatoes are much harder to peel than big potatoes because you just have less surface area to kind of grab on them. And do one more potato. But mashed potatoes are one of my family's favorite ways to do potatoes here, so we probably have it at least once a week or once every other week during the fall, winter, during the cold months. Just because it's just a nice, easy side to make that makes everyone happy. Okay, let me give these these onions a nice stir. We're starting to see a little bit of them starting to get a little bit golden. There we go. And I'm gonna now start to dice up my potatoes. We do wanna make sure our potatoes, when we cut them up, are about the same size pieces so that they all cook up around the same time. Because bigger pieces, of course, take longer, and if you have a lot of pieces that are smaller than your big pieces, those will just kind of dissolve away into your water. So always try to make your potato chunks about the same size so they'll cook up evenly and not go to mush. I'll give these, I'm doing kind of like a, almost like a 1 inch by 1 inch cubing. So not super small, but enough to keep their nice tender shape when we're boiling them. Get these chopped. And almost done, and then we'll pop these in our water over there that I have heating up. And cut through. One more, we're gonna have this, and I'll cut it through. Perfect. And mashed potatoes, you could also do just like a boiled and then like a fried potato, and you could play this with them. You make a lovely gravy with these with the Swedish meatballs, which just pairs great with mashed potatoes, because who doesn't love mashed potatoes and gravy? And so we have these. Also, sometimes I serve them with peas, because it kind of gives you that, like, almost, if you think about it, how you would have mashed potatoes, peas, and meatloaf. So it's kind of just along the line. It works well with them. Okay, I'm gonna get my potatoes in the water that we're heating up. We're gonna let them start cooking. There we go. And we'll use this for, gotta use that for one thing. Let me check on my potatoes over here that are boiling. I'm gonna grab a fork and poke them and see if they're soft yet. Shouldn't take too long to cook these up. Pull one out and pop it on here. Ooh, almost there, pretty soft. Maybe about another minute or two boiling. Okay, while our onions are sauteing up, stir them. We want to wait, you see how we have some browning edge? We want to wait until they're all brown, so we don't see any more white and it's all just yellow and brown. The more browning and caramelization on it, the better flavor you'll have. So, since we're using 2 pounds of meat, we're going to be using 2 slices of bread. This is just plain sandwich bread. I think it's a honey wheat, but any bread you can use sandwich bread. You don't want one with a super chewy crust, because that won't get soggy easily. And we're just going to cover each slice of bread with a little bit of cream. You could use cream or milk. Either one works.
I have a question. Why do you have 2 pots of potatoes?
This one I'm cooking up fast because I'm putting this potato in my meatball recipe. So it's gonna go with the pork and onions, and it's gonna go in our meatball, and that's gonna be for mashed potatoes later. So I'm just cooking this one up quicker. So I've got my bread in here in the milk. You just put enough milk or cream to make the bread soggy, because this is going to be a binding agent for it. And then I'm going to add in 2 eggs. So it's essentially 1 egg per pound, 1 slice of bread per pound of meat, and 1 onion per pound of meat. So since we're doing 2 pounds, we're doing 2 of everything. And you just got to kind of get in there. It's meatballs, so you're going to be rolling them around with your hands anyways. And again, this will get in there. And with cooking, a lot of you can't be afraid to just get in there with your hands. That's how all the best cooks do it. I said there's nothing dainty about cooking. It's all about some elbow grease and making sure it turns out delicious. Okay, well now we've got our onions. They're starting to get nice and brown and caramelized. Perfect. And the trick is you really need to make sure they're all caramelized. You don't want to have any little whiter colored onions in there, because they won't be tender in our meatballs. Okay. So I'm going to turn off my water. I'm going to turn off my onions because they're just about where we need. And I'll shake my hands. we've got there. I'm gonna give it a quick rinse because I'm gonna need to use both hands for a second. Okay, so I'm gonna strain my potatoes here. So we just have this. Okay, so you see we have our boiled potatoes, and I'm just gonna go through with my fork real quick, and I'm just going to mash them up because this potato, the starch in the potato, along with the bread, is gonna act as the binding agent in our Swedish meatballs. So also a little bit different than traditional meatballs, but definitely worth it. Okay, and these are nice and mashed up. Okay, let's put in our pork, and then we're gonna put in our seasonings, and then our onions and our potato in this mix, and then we'll give it all mushed together. So we're using 2 pounds of ground pork. Pork is where you want to be at with these mashed potatoes, or with these meatballs, because ground beef just doesn't cut it. A lot of places use ground beef in their meatballs, and it just doesn't have the right flavor profile. Because originally, Swedish meatballs were made with veal, which has a taste different than beef. Okay, we're gonna add in, this is my clean hand, this is my meat touching hand. So we're gonna add in some pepper. You're gonna want about a teaspoon of pepper. I'm just gonna eyeball it. And then we're gonna want about a tablespoon of garlic salt, or you could use regular salt if you want it, but I feel like the garlic salt gives it a little extra oomph. So we're gonna, there, good. And now we're gonna add in our mashed potatoes, our one mashed potato, I should say. We have that in our mixed. And now our sauteed onions. And these are gonna give you a great flavor for the meatballs. And then you're just gonna start, you're gonna wanna put the cold stuff up first and kind of bury the hot stuff in, or you could wait until everything is cooled down. But once you get it touching the cold stuff, the onions and the potatoes won't be that hot to work with. And you're just gonna mix everything together, really squeezing the mixture through your fingers and your hands. Again, making meatballs is a messy art, nothing clean about it. And you're just gonna work it in here and work until it's thoroughly combined, until you have your meatball kind of dough working. And it's gonna be, it thickens up the longer it sits, I will say. And work it. But these make a very tender meatball. They're not tough, and they're not dry.
You have a question? Someone missed the beginning. What were the first few things that went into the mixture?
Yes, so we did 2 eggs, 2 slices of bread that we then soaked in cream, enough to make them kind of soggy into a paste. Then we added our 2 pounds of ground pork, a teaspoon of black pepper, a tablespoon of garlic salt, and then 1 mashed up potato and 2 minced and sauteed caramelized onions to our mixture. And now we have a nice, beautiful mix for our meatballs. And we're gonna roll them out. So I've got my baking sheet right here, and we're gonna roll these out. Now, you could use a cookie scoop kind of and scoop them out. You could also coat your hands with olive oil to roll them out. But I find just getting in there and just not being afraid to get your hands dirty just works fine. Like I said, cooking it's hard to stay clean in cooking. That's why you got aprons and stuff like that to help keep yourself clean. I know that whenever I cook without an apron, I get oil on my clothes without fail. And oil is so hard to get out of clothes. You have to kind of wash it with dish soap first before you can get it out. So just be prepared to make a mess. And here we're gonna do these. And remember, our meatballs will shrink just a little bit. They always do because they'll sweat out some of their natural juices when we bake them. And I do have my oven preheated to 375 degrees. And I think what sets, this is my well, I say my mom's recipe, but it's my grandmother's recipe. And my family is from Sweden. My mom was born in Sweden. And so this is their recipe, and it's very different. Like, it doesn't taste like the Americanized version of Swedish meatballs, which typically uses ground beef because it's, I guess, cheaper to use ground beef, although I find ground pork is fairly cheap at the grocery store. But they're so delicious. And it is definitely, once you've tried them, they're great. You can also use this same recipe, but you put it in a burger form, and it's called like hackaflesh, which sounds like a terrible name, but it's a really good like onion burger almost, if you think about it, and it's delicious.
You have a question? Who taught you to cook?
Well, it's kind of, I learned through lots of different channels. I mean, I learned from, my mom. She cooked, we had all like home cooked meals growing up until I was about 10. And then when we moved from Iowa to just outside of Nashville, we did have a cook who cooked for us, and I watched her for about 2 years. And then when I was 13, I took over the job of cooking family dinner for our family. It was a great way to, it was the best paying chore, I'll tell you that. You just had to cook and clean up, and I made bank doing it. And that, I just learned through that. And then my parents had lots of dinner parties, and they would have local chefs come for them. And so I just learned. And I also was a big fan of like MasterChef, Top Chef, Hell's Kitchen, all of those shows. And I had like Gourmet Magazine, Fine Cooking, just all of those. And I read, and I just kind of self-taught myself through it. But I was exposed on like lots of different, angles. And being the one who cooked for our family, my mom was really supportive, and she would always like get me the cool cooking gadgets or the cool ingredients to experiment with, because it was a win for her. Oh, if I cook great food, she gets to eat great food. So it kind of came from every angle. You
have a question? You ever considered trying out for one of those Gordon Ramsay shows?
I always thought about it, but I don't know if I could handle that abuse. I feel like they get yelled at for every little thing, and I'd be told everything was trash. I know it because I don't put any effort into presentation. I just want good tasting food. It's like everyone said, oh, you should open up a restaurant. I said, oh, if I opened up a restaurant, it wouldn't be fun. It wouldn't be enjoyable. And, I do have 5 kids, and I don't know if I could like be gone for that long. It's hard. Like, I mean, when I have to be gone if one kid has like a weekend, like a tournament out of state or whatnot, it's hard when I have to leave the rest of the family at home, because they're so used to my cooking over my husband. There's a difference when Mama's meals or Papa Bear meals, and they all prefer one over the other. Okay, so we've got our meatballs out. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash, and we're going to pop these in the oven. Okay, here we go. And these are our beautiful meatballs. They will shrink up a little bit, but they won't get super small. We're gonna have them cook they only take a little bit of time to cook, about 20 minutes max. Now, if you make bigger meatballs, they will need more time and smaller ones less time. So we're gonna have those cooking, and we're gonna prep the rest of dinner. So I've got my potatoes boiling. We're gonna now do our caramelized carrots and onions. So we just clean up our station just a little bit. And we're gonna use our same pan that we sauteed our onions in because we're gonna be sauteing onions and carrots now. So I'm gonna use 1 onion here. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna chop off my ends, make a slit down, We're gonna take off this outer layer. And I say, like, don't even bother trying to peel off this one. Just get that whole first layer and peel it off, because this is a very chewy onion and it doesn't cook up quite as nice. So I just get rid of that whole big outer white one. And then since these are our caramelized onions and they're gonna go with our carrots, I'm gonna do them long. That way they'll kind of be nice and stringy with our caramelized carrots. There we go. And we're gonna put a little bit of olive oil in our tray, about a tablespoon and a half. You know, I have a big tray, so you need a little bit more olive oil than if you were making a smaller batch. But again, we are feeding 7 tonight. My husband and I and our 5 kids. I'm gonna turn that on. And then if you see on our potatoes, we have this white bubbly stuff, that's potato starch. I'm gonna get a paper towel and blot it off, and it just gets rid of some of the starch on our potatoes, and it makes for a little bit more fluffy potato. A lot of times you can rinse your potato first before you do it, but I find this little trick, just to kind of dip your paper towel around the top, and it will just get some of that starch up, that potato starch. There we go. Perfect. It will help with the boil over if your pot boils over, and just makes for a nicer potato as well. Let me get us tongs and we're gonna toss these real quick. I'm gonna break up my onions that I sliced, and then we're gonna make sure they get everywhere and covered with the olive oil. Okay, and then I'm gonna be using some, pre-cut, peeled, washed baby carrots for our things, and I'm gonna be halving in them and quartering them depending if we have a big one, so they'll cook up nice and tender. Now, if you were gonna use some big carrots, just peel them and then just slice them up. Kind of, I would probably quarter them. So you don't want them to be, halving is fine. If you have a really big one, quarter it. And so we're gonna have all of these, and then we'll toss them in there with our caramelized onions. And then we'll add a little bit of garlic salt and brown sugar towards the end. And it will just be a really lovely caramelized onions and carrot. The brown sugar will pick up on the natural sweetness in the onions and in the carrots. This is one of my favorite vegetable sides to do. I'm gonna do this one into quarters because it was a fat one. Fun fact about carrots. So up until I think it was like the 1700s, the most popular form of carrot was actually a white variety and a red variety. And then, I believe it was the Dutch, crossbred them to create the orange carrot, which was a sweeter and nicer variety. And it became so popular that you rarely even see the red variety anymore or the white variety, because these are so popular. But it's funny how they knew how to crossbreed stuff all the way back in, the 1700s. I mean, they did it with the tulip to make the different variations, so I guess they knew what they were doing with farming. There we go. Breaking up mine. We're starting to get a nice golden yellow on there. That's just the natural sweetness of the onions coming out into caramelize. Beautiful. And just turn that down, and then we're going to finish having these. Perfect. And cut these through. If you get a big fat one, just quarter it, because baby carrots, although they're called baby carrots, they do not come from baby carrots. They actually are full-size carrots that have been shaved down into these delicious little carrots. And I remember when baby carrots first came out in I want to say the early 90s, when they first started selling them. And it increased, just by having them prepared like that, more people started eating carrots. It increased the consumption of carrots by like 700% in like the first year. And it's just interesting, just making something easier to eat made more people eat them. And for, you know, an upcharge, of course. There we go. And we got our carrots all quartered and halved. Let me give these one last toss. You want to make sure you have a good start to your caramelization on your onions before you add your carrots in, because once you add the carrots in, your pan is not going to be as hot altogether, and your caramelization process kind of stops.
Yeah, a question. What kind of knife do you use for your chef's knife?
Yes, so this is a Worcester Classic. I've had this one for like 16, 17 years now. I got it when we got married. It was part of one of my wedding gifts, and I love it. I mean, to still use it after this year, and there's nothing wrong with it. You know, I just sharpen it up every now and then when it gets dull using my honing steel. But I will say, invest. If you have the money and the funds to do it and you are ready to start on your cooking, invest in a good set of knives, because they will be with you forever. It's like my mom, it's funny, she has this bread knife that she got for her wedding back in the early 70s, and it's still going strong. I
mean, I wouldn't say strong.
No, I won't say it is not. It has wheeled it down, but it's still a knife. I mean, bread knives are tricky, because bread knives, you can't really sharpen them because of the serrated edges. So that one I wouldn't necessarily splurge on, but a good chef knife like this and a good paring knife. Those are the two that you really need. And everything else is just for the bells and whistles. But those two are kind of essential. Let's see, I think these are still a bit firm. They need a little bit longer. Okay, we're gonna start prepping the stuff for our gravy here in just a second. So, I'm gonna steal a little bit of this boiling water for my gravy, because it's a nice starchy water, which will help thicken it up. So let me get a ladle here. Because instead of using beef like broth, I'm gonna use some beef bouillon, but I'm gonna use my potato broth, I should say, with it. This will just give it an extra thickness, has those natural starches, and it's already nice and hot. And we're gonna need about 2 cups of this to make our yummy gravy for our potatoes and our mashed potatoes. Okay. The gravy that we make with Swedish Meatballs uses bouillon, like broth and cream. It's like a beefy, creamy gravy. It's delish. Okay, let me get a spoon, and we're gonna put a heaping spoonful of beef bouillon in here. And I like to use beef bouillon over beef broth, because I feel like I get more, it has more flavor out of it. And this little thing is like equivalent to like 8 boxes of beef broth. So it also takes a heck of a lot less space in your pantry or in your refrigerator than a beef broth does. So I'm a fan of it. You can also use the cubes or the powder. They all just kind of work well. So you just kind of rehydrate it back up, and beautiful.
You got a comment about the potato water. So what is that? What's the reason for doing that over regular water?
There is a little bit of potato starch in it, which will act as a natural thickener for the gravy. We'll be doing a roux base of flour and butter, but this just enhances it. And it's also piping hot, which helps you dissolve the bouillon as well. So it's kind of a twofold. Regular water would work just fine if you didn't have it, but it's kind of along the similar concept of using pasta water to thicken your pasta sauces. It has that starch in it that is a natural thickener. Okay. Let's check these potatoes and see if they're ready. My trick is I'm going to go through and find my biggest potato, and if my fork smushes through it easily, they're ready to be strained and whipped up for mashed potatoes. If it doesn't, you're just gonna wanna continue. There we go, pretty easy all the way through. That means they're ready. If the fork doesn't go through easy, you wanna continue boiling, otherwise you'll have chunks in your mashed potatoes. So I'm gonna turn this guy off, and we're gonna get my strainer here. And let me go grab a trivet. So I'm going to put this on my counter right here. And I think I've got an onion in there somehow. And then I'm going to put in 1 stick of butter in my potatoes. And we're going to let it sit and melt before we start the whipping process. That way it gets nice and soft. I also use room temperature butter instead of cold butter because sometimes cold butter does not melt as fast, and you get like a butter chunk in your potato, which isn't a bad thing, but I find room temperature is better. Okay, let's turn on our burner here, and we're gonna put it down to about a medium, and then we're gonna make a quick roux for our gravy, which is going to start with this is about a little less than 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to wait until they're melted, and then we're going to add some flour, then we'll add our broth and milk. I'm going to grab some brown sugar for our carrots real quick. Because this is going to add a boost of flavor, but before we do that, I'm going to sprinkle them with a little bit of garlic salt. I love using garlic salt in cooking because it gives a nice little punch. There we go. We're going to give this a nice toss. There. So then we'll add the sugar to it, and it's going to give you that sweet, savory, like umami to it. Got my butter melting. You want to start low temperature. You don't want it super high when you're making your roux or you'll burn it. A roux is if you don't know what it is, it's a base for gravies or gumbos, but it's a kind of a thickener. And it starts with just flour and butter. So I've got my flour here. And then I'm just gonna put in some flour to start.
Yeah, you have a question. When the carrots and onions are done, will they be crunchy or soft?
It will be tender. So you're kind of cooking them slow and low, so they'll be soft and tender, but a little firm, but not crunchy. They'll be firm, but yeah. So they'll be as if you steamed them, but not mushy. So that's kind of the trick you want, because you don't want them to be mushy, but you don't want them hard. So that's why we go low and slow over the heat, and then I'll add my sugar in towards the end. If you add your sugar in too soon, then it can caramelize in the pan and almost turn to candy. So that's why we'll put them in there, and these cook for another 5 minutes, and then they'll be ready. So here we're making the base to our gravy. We put in, I think, about a tablespoon of flour in with our butter. And we're cooking it up. If you were making a gumbo, you would be literally cooking this until it turns a rich brown, or like an etouffee. Let's just put a little bit more. But we're using it for our gravy, so we don't need to brown it. But that's how gumbos and etouffees get their rich color, is just caramelizing this essentially. And now we're gonna take our broth that we put up there. I'm going to add it to here, nice and slowly. And we're making sure to whisk. And this getting all the way around. And the key is you gotta whisk fast so you don't burn it or curdle it or thicken it. And then we're gonna gotta get my cream over here. Turn up my heat a little bit. As the heat cooks it, it continues to thicken it. And gonna add in a bit of cream because it is a creamy gravy for our Swedish meatballs. So that is about 1/4 of a cup to start with. We'll see how it looks in a little bit. But it's gonna have this just lovely kind of cafe latte color to it. And we're just gonna keep whisking. And I'll probably have to add a little bit broth because as it continues to heat up, it thickens and thickens. Beautiful. Now we're getting this lovely kind of caramelizations on our onions, or on our carrots too. Beautiful. We'll be ready to add in our brown sugar in just a second. There we go. You can see it's already thickening up a little bit more. And we'll add a little bit more broth. And then I'm going to use my spoon. We're going to taste it. So good. It just is like a beefy, creamy gravy that just works well with the Swedish meatballs. In there. The trick is you do need to continuously whisk. Once you're done, you turn off the heat, and then it will sit. But if you don't stop whisking, it will thicken. You see how it will boil really fast like this, and it will thicken up really quick and can burn at the bottom. So constant whisking is the key. And I'm just gonna pull it to the side. And then we're gonna whip up our mashed potatoes in just a second. So we put our stick of butter in here, and now we're gonna add some cream, about 1/4 of a cup, and then a little bit of salt. It's about, I wanna say maybe 1.5 teaspoons. And then we're gonna whip these guys up. Oh, how about I turn and plug it in. And this will be the mashed potatoes that we will serve with our caramelized carrots and onions, our Swedish meatballs, and gravy. So.
You got a question about the roux. You put the flour in with the butter to start?
Yes.
And not with water?
No, you melt the butter first, then you add the flour. We used about 1.5 tablespoons to maybe 2 tablespoons. And you kind of cook it in the butter until it's all clumps are gone and it's dissolved. And then you add your broth in slowly, and then your cream. Put a little bit more in because we want a nice whipped mashed potato. Now I'm whipping mine right in the pot because it's a stainless steel pot. If you are cooking in a non-stick or an enamel coated pot, do not beat your mashed potatoes in there. You will ruin your pot. So I do it in my stainless steel because it works great. Here are our beautiful mashed potatoes. Give this a nice spoon for us to scoop up. Perfect.
You got a question about the broth. What kind is it and how much of it?
I use beef broth, or I use Better Than Bouillon. Here's a picture. Better Than Bouillon mixed with hot potato water, so the water left over from boiling our potatoes. And I used a big heaping spoonful of that I used a little bit less than 2 cups of broth in here with about 1/4 of a cup of heavy cream to make our lovely gravy. Now we're gonna add in our brown sugar for our caramelized carrots and onions. This is about 1/4 of a cup of brown sugar. You don't need too much. And then I'm gonna use just a little bit of this butter. It's not even a 1/2 teaspoon, just a pinch of it, but it will make a nice little caramel sauce on here. And we did coat these with garlic salt, so it's gonna have that sweet and savory flavor. There we go. And I started cooking out my carrots and onions in olive oil because I find that if you use butter from the start, butter has milk solids in it, and over time those milk solids can burn. So I like olive oil and then just finish with a little bit of butter to give it that kind of rich flavor in it. So, and you can see how the brown sugar has completely dissolved and we have just this little sweet caramelization to them. So we've got this, and I believe our meatballs should be ready to come out, and then we'll be ready to serve up. Ooh, perfect. They've got a nice golden tip on them. Beautiful.
You have a question? Are any of your children picky eaters?
Yes. My middle child, she's 9, she'll be 10 this summer. She is my biggest food critic ever. She gets it from my husband. My husband's also a picky eater. But she is picky eater, but we make her try everything. All of my kids have gone through a picky eating stage, but they've come out of it. Like my older two are 15 and 13 now, and they eat everything. They'll try everything. Now there are some things they don't like as much as others, but they eat everything. And my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old eat everything as well. Well, let's plate up our Swedish meatballs and with our gravy for dinner tonight. Let me get a spoon out for the gravy as well. I like to ladle it on. So, we'll have our mashed potatoes, our caramelized carrots and onions.
Yeah, somebody asking for the recipe that is going to be posted.
Yes, I'll work on a recipe card for these meatballs. They're really easy to make and they're delicious. A lot of times you make them in a big batch, and then you can just fry them up in a saute pan, and you can keep them in your freezer and they'll last forever.
And this video will be posted.
Yes, and we'll post this video on there. And then we're gonna drizzle these. We've got the gravy over this. And we'll probably serve with our leftover sourdough bread. But this is our dinner tonight. Easy, delicious Swedish meatballs. My grandmother's recipe, you know, she's from Sweden. My mom's from Sweden as well. With our caramelized carrots and onions and mashed potatoes, and of course the delicious gravy. Well guys, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to comment or send us a message if you have any cooking questions or any recipes that you would like to see us cook. We love any suggestions. Again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.